Well, welcome everyone to our June webinar as part of our Road to Resilience learning series. Today, our topic is going to focus on how do you continue on the journey when the road is under construction? We know that change happens, and how are you going to manage during times of constant change? I am your speaker today, Linda Nelson, and I have been conducting this webinar series for this year, and we'll look forward to the continued ones. Please share with your friends, and the past webinars are available on our website and on our YouTube channel as well if you'd like to catch up with them. With our Road to Resilience learning series, this was actually a suggestion. At the end of each webinar, we provide you with 3 questions to answer as part of our post survey and a suggestion on topics. And one of our avid listeners for years said, could we earn some kind of a badge? And so as a result of that, we put together this learning series badge because this year's topic was going to be one where we address kind of that road to resilience in different pieces and felt it would be a good idea. So thank you for that idea that came, I believe, from Ghana. And if you could, in the post-survey webinar, please share your ideas because we do read them and we do use them as ideas for things to come for next year as well. So the question is on the table. We talk about resilience. Everybody has their different definitions and all of that. But the question is, how are you going to travel down that road to resilience? Where do you want to go? Who's planning the journey? Who's going to be going? Is everybody going? Only some of you going? Somebody has to have some roles and responsibilities. Today's topic, what do we do if the road actually gets closed? Our path that we had planned isn't going to work. You have people that are experiencing some motion sickness, which is our subject for next month, talking about employee resilience. Looking at other things that might disrupt your journey, taking a minute to think about what you've learned so far, and the question, if you've ever had kids or even in your own mind when you're on a trip, are we there yet? And how are we doing on that trip? And did we end up in the right place? Is this where we want to be? So today for our agenda and outcomes, we're going to just briefly look at traditional change management and how you manage change, or comparing that to the topic of managing change. It's sort of like looking at risk management versus managing risk. Today we're going to look at change management versus managing change. Then we're going to explore resilience as a strategy to manage change by looking at what does the adaptable and flexible organization look like, and how you might design a more change-friendly organization. So looking at structure and design. And finally, looking at building adaptability at all levels. Organizations are made of people, so we need to make sure we have the right people on board, or that we can help them to be more adaptable and flexible. By the way, depending on what is your primary language, the word agile is oftentimes used in exchange or as in alongside with the adaptable, flexible, and agile. We decided to stick with agile and flexible because that is the term that we're using for our behaviors, and also because we didn't want to pigeonhole agile to just be about agile project management. We wanted you to take a broader look at the subject. As usual, our recordings will be available on our core webinar page, usually by Friday. If you're watching this on Wednesday, so in about 2 days. It'll also be in our YouTube channel. If you have questions anytime along, do use the questions button. I usually will check the questions as they come along when we're doing a poll, or if I see that there's a few in the queue there. If we miss answering any of your questions, we will include the answers to that in your email after the webinar. And in order to receive that certificate of attendance that usually will come out either Friday or Monday, you'll need to attend a minimum of 35 minutes. So let's begin. Traditional change management. I'm going to save you and tell you that we're not going to go through the 5 most common change management models, but I do want to point out that traditional change management is really best suited for simple changes based on a project or something that you're trying to push through and how you're doing something. It might be part of a merger acquisition. It might be using a new system that you're putting into place, or a new software or something. And it's also really suited for cultures that accept that top-down chain of command control, which is, we're going to finish up the webinar today with some of my favorite cartoons about why change management fails. But that traditional top-down chain of command control means that change is kind of being forced upon you. In using this at its most literal terms, I'm sure that's not the case for the most part, but just this idea that there wouldn't be this many jokes about change management if people didn't resist. And so to think about change, I want you to think about change as a process, not a product of a set of activities that you've gone through. And that it's about picking a new route on your journey, not canceling your journey, or not picking a new journey. The fact that we have to sometimes pick a new route and where we're going. And oftentimes when we look at traditional change management, the people who design the change are the ones that are taking the journey. And they're the ones that have concluded that wherever we are now isn't sustainable, that there needs to be that change. And they are the ones that define the foundations of the vision and all the details needed to achieve it. And then they hand it off for us to implement. So change that is defined, packaged, and sold to others as a product often misses the point that process serves a purpose. That purpose is really to provide that time and context for people to participate in the change journey. I'll use a business continuity example for this, in that we talk about writing your business continuity plan or your emergency management plan, whatever it is, that you can have somebody go out and write it for you, and you can try to implement it, and it doesn't necessarily work, because being part of the process of writing it is where you get that time and context and where you get that understanding of that process. And the process is much more important oftentimes than the product itself. In fact, if you look back at our blogs from several years ago, we talked about a school in Minnesota that had had an explosion, and everything, all of the paperwork for how to manage that type of event was lost. But the fact was that the spokesperson or the communication person for that school, who was the person who does all the fundraising, given it was a private school, was in the building during the explosion, and she had to escape from the building. And the very first person she saw when she escaped was a reporter with a microphone interface. The reporter just happened to be coming down the road when the school exploded and got there first before even the fire trucks did. And this spokesperson, this woman, was able to give a cohesive statement. I don't know what happened. I just left the building. I just got out, but we will find out. We'll be strong. We know what our purpose is. And she just went on because she had been part of the process of writing all those key statements. Therefore, she didn't need the paper. I'll use the word paper in quotation marks if you could see me. She didn't need that because she was part of the process. Therefore, she was able to engage and do what she needed to do when that happened. Of course, Charles Darwin, you can't talk about change without talking about Charles Darwin. And the most people, you can argue about the strongest and the species and the most intelligent, but the idea is that you have to be adaptable to change. It isn't always based on your physical strength or your intellectual strength. It can just be people who are more adaptable to change. So let's get started. I just want to ask a quick poll because I do like to engage people at the beginning. To what extent is your role part of the organization's change management process? And I'm only going to give you like 20 seconds to do this. This is an easy one to do. Do you work closely with the change people in your organization? Do you work together only when you need to? Or do you not work with the change management people at all? And this is just helping me to provide some context so I understand who's in the room, so to speak. I'll give you about 5 more seconds to vote. interesting results is that 50% of you work together as needed, which pretty much makes sense. 26% of you and pretty much 23% of you are split between working closely together and that you don't have a role at this time. I would suggest that if you're part of managing risk for your organization, that you should be part of managing change. And when we talk about agile project management, and we've got a couple of webinars on this, it's really, to understand, you need to understand the changes that are happening in the organization in order to manage the risk as well. So if you're part of that piece, if you don't have a role at this time, try to seek out how you can have a role. I wanted to tie this back to some of the models that I-Corps uses. We have our organizational resilience model, and we have our really our three strategies. And under preparedness and managing risk, we have managing change, and that the organization should be implementing systems to anticipate, plan, and respond to changing circumstances. And more resilient organizations have demonstrated a commitment to managing change using that agile change management process throughout the entire organization, not just in bits and pieces, and they include everyone in that process. And that the organization has that capability to consistently deliver on its commitments under changing circumstances and to be able to adapt its operations accordingly. And this is where, if you're a business continuity person as well, if you've got a business interruption, if you've got your plans in place that you're able to change and adapt how you're operating in order to continue operations, you have won. You're very successful here. So I also wanted to point out to you inside the circle here that our very first set of behaviors are adaptive and flexible. So let's dig down a little bit deeper. Just wanted to share that what we call our enabling behaviors. So we can have these capabilities, we can have these strategies, which really is the what. Our behaviors become the how. And what we'll be talking about today for managing change, obviously all of these are important, but the most important behavior for today's subject is that ability to change, evolve, and adapt in response to those changing circumstances. And I would even say to get ahead of it, not just in response, but what do we forecast? Adaptability is an age-old approach to managing change, and we know that the only constant in life is change and that we need to be flexible and adaptable. And so when you're looking at not just adversity, but any type of change, we need to have the advantage of being adaptable in order to manage it. So next we're going to take a closer look at what does an adaptable and flexible organization look like. The first thing is just accepting, quit fighting it. We are living in a world that is constantly changing, and we need to just accept that and to be looking out ahead of us to see, okay, we're forecasting that we might be seeing these changes in our supply chain, or we might be seeing these changes in our customer base, or in the product that we have. We might be needing to, to put a new version out or to do some adapting based on, maybe if you're in the automobile industry, or you're supporting electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, whatever those changes need to be. And making sure that it's really here that is that mindset. We're going to talk more about the mindset as well. But that you've got formal structures and mechanisms in place that allow you to modify your activities. And I always like this picture of this building going from round and kind of a peach color to being square and more of a green color, that you're building flexibility into your organization's systems so they can evolve and maneuver quickly when you see change coming. And being able to not just avoid risk, but to capitalize on those opportunities to build. A lot of times people use the word build back better, but also having that agility. So here we're using that word agile again as we're talking about being adaptable and flexible. To make decisions quickly. Which brings us to how do they behave? And leadership and strategy pretty much drives the behaviors, and looking at how can we put together pathways to promote just-in-time decision making, and looking at these different points for decision point analysis that should be part of all program and project management activities. And really understanding that our strategy and program, whatever we're doing, whatever we're producing, aren't fixed, but they need to be kept fluid. And so they need to be able to evolve with need and be able to accelerate with need. So being able to look at, okay, where are we now? Where do we think we're going? What are the changes that we see happening now? And what can we predict potentially to happen to start getting ready in case that does happen? And so to do that, you need to make sure that your organization is structured in both kind of a mixture of centralized and decentralized networked, and we're using the words interested parties here, but I would say networked teams or networked people that's all coordinated through a central program. So this idea that from the very top, we're looking at where do we need to be centralized, where can we decentralize, and how can we network our people? We're going to talk more about that as well. And then looking at what kinds of structures and roles and responsibilities do we have in place for that rapid gathering, collation, sharing, and use of data and information, that everybody knows that. And so one of my kids is in, her job is in data analytics. And so these are the things she talks about all the time is, where's your data? Tell me, this is what we have. This is what we predict we're going to be having. And obviously with all the artificial intelligence and Power BI and all these other things that are out there that are becoming more and more available to even small businesses, we need to be using those as tools to help us to be more adaptable and flexible. Kind of tying back to some of the topics that we've talked about in the past, including on this journey, is that your organization needs to have that shared vision and understanding of your purpose, and that it needs to be regularly reviewed by looking at what do we see happening in the future and what do we see as both needs and changes, and making sure that you're taking this new information and knowledge and you're integrating into those decision-making processes. That you've got stakeholder engagement. I'm sure you've heard and yet you're aware of how important it is that your people are engaged, both internally and externally, that you've got that open communication. But the fact is that if you don't have engagement, you're going to have change resistance. And so you need to understand what the causes are, and you need to acknowledge those and need to actively manage those, and so to really build that effective engagement. And so everybody feels like they're part of this mindset of continuous change. And then looking at, again, how can we build flexibility into our organization with as flat of structures as we can and give our teams as much empowerment as we're able to do. Which brings us to the third piece, which is that systems. We need to be operating as systems and not in silos. And so that we've got, not just intelligent systems, but that they're integrated. And we're going to talk about different nodes and making sure that we're all networked together so that we can continually review and improve that data and information flow. It's great if we have the knowledge and information, but if nobody knows about it or only a few people know about it, it's not going to be very engaging. And so just making sure that we're, as an organization, reviewing the capabilities of your people, reviewing the capabilities of your systems, and that you're doing this with the mindset of what it looks like under changing circumstances. So if there's only one thing you walk away from today, you're busy, maybe you're multitasking, maybe you're in 3 meetings or you're writing a report at the same time or watching your kid at daycare. I want you to walk away with this one idea, that managing change is more than change management. And it's about changing your mindset. It's about how you think and how you behave, which is why we're talking about this adaptable and flexible and agile behavior. So we need to make accepting change part of who you are, because the traditional view is we need this formal change management process because everybody's going to say no, and we're going to have to use our talent programs to help give us stability with this. Instead, what we need you to think about is that trying to be more resilient and accepting change is part of who you are, and that your talent programs, which is what we're going to finish up with today, exist to enable that resilience. So you're hiring the right people to fit in your DNA about managing change. Of course, butterflies are always cool. There's tons of things in nature that we can use as an examples of being adaptable, but it really is who you are or something that you become versus something that you do. And so understanding that we need to have the right organizational structure, we need to have a team environment, and we need to have leadership that nurtures resilience in its people in this constant face of change. Because like we're going to talk about next month is employee resilience or workforce resilience. Not everybody is healthy, and sometimes change just breaks people and the speed of that. And so we need to understand that in order to help our people out to do that and to be as successful as they can. And so this idea that it's something you become, we're always getting better at it. So that mindset of change readiness instead of change management, that change is constant and that we need to be adaptable and flexible in how we approach each day. This will really help us to get around that resistance to change mindset. And so as a leader, every one of you is a leader somewhere in your organization, even if you're just leading yourself. But the idea that you need to shift your view of leadership from telling people what to do to convening, to having that collaboration and how to manage this ever-changing environment. So what do you think we should do as we see? What kinds of changes do you see? And make it a very inclusive and collaborative environment. I like to think about, instead of using the word managing change, because everybody's like, oh no, I don't want that, is just think about it as part of your continuous improvement. Every one of your management systems, if you have any of those in place, from quality management to safety, whatever it is the idea is that you're supposed to be continuously improving. And so if you can keep it as simple as be better than you were yesterday, tomorrow I'm going to be better than I am today. And to me, that is much less scary than that I've got to be ready for this change that's coming. Because we shouldn't see change as a threat. We should see it as an opportunity, and we should not see survival as the goal, because that is pretty scary, meaning that you might not survive. But the idea that you can be part of this transformative success. When we operate in an environment of continual adaptation, we need to be looking for new opportunities, and because there's going to be challenges. And so this is where we start rethinking your organizational structure and the way we serve our customers. And this can really impact the business model itself and the size of your organization and the people at all levels of your organization. Sometimes even requires some radical rethinking of how your organization operates and looking at we might need to change our culture, which is not going to happen overnight. So how can we do that and support that with internal processes, make sure we have the right technology systems and business models in case? Because it's not about incremental improvement, but it's really about reimagining and reshaping how the organization can better align with your strategic vision, how we can adapt to new opportunities, and how can we confront those emerging challenges. Obviously, this isn't probably a bottom-up activity, but it should be a bottom, middle, and top activity all together. But we need leadership at all levels to manage change. And to do that, we need to have leaders who aren't afraid of change, who can navigate when there's ambiguity and complexity, and can harness that increasingly diverse workforce. Because a diverse workforce is one way you manage change, by getting the right people in the right room at the right time and being able to hear all different ideas. So our job is to energize people, articulate that compelling vision, and really instill that common sense of purpose as well as psychological safety. Empower people, so you need to be able to delegate responsibility and relinquish control. And you need to do that to leverage those collective abilities of that diverse workforce as of the entire organization. And of course, you need to connect. We're going to talk a lot about encouraging collaboration across boundaries, trying to connect those silos and unlock all those synergies that are hiding in there to be able to strengthen those networks of teams. We often talk about teams, but I want you to start thinking about this as a network of teams. Because leaders need to exist at all levels, they need to be inclusive, and they need to foster that environment or culture for high-performing teams. To do that, we need to make managing change inclusive. So how do we integrate the ingenuity of our employees into every stage of those processes? And how do we support them in initiating their own ideas for managing changes that impact those activities? And it really gets down to that effectively managing change is going to be impacted by your organizational structure and design. Now, one of the challenges with the webinar and the polls is that I can only put so many words in there. So I'm going to go ahead and read it as I launch this because you won't see the whole, necessarily the whole piece. So the question is, to what extent does your organization demonstrate both the mindset and ability to effectively manage change? So you would choose number one if you demonstrate both the mindset and ability and it's throughout the organization. You would choose number two if you see it in some parts of the organization. And you would see it number three if we're mostly reactive to change. And I'll give you about 20 more seconds. All right, it looks like most of you have voted. So just like with the last one, we saw most of you in the middle. In this case, 63% of you say it's evident in some areas of the organization. And this is really exciting because this means that you've got some really good things happening. And so as you start to break down those boundaries, you can then start to leverage the knowledge and the expertise you have in one space to bring it so that you have it throughout the organization. If those 7% of you that are mostly reactive, that it's got to be frustrating. It's got to be a frustrating place to work, and I'm sorry for you. But you know what? You can try to implement change in your space and try to become that pearl that you're not seeing in other places. So let's move next to looking at organizational structure and design. So it's really a definition of organizational design is, how should your organization function or perform better? Excuse me, I'm clicking in the wrong place with my thing. The traditional way, and most organizations have some sort of authoritative design where there's responsibility in the hands of leadership. The question becomes, or the challenge becomes, when that's the only place it is. So we're not saying that one of these is better than the other. We're saying that you can't be all of everything in the same place. While you can be authoritative in some places, like just today at my office, somebody made a decision. I provided a direction for something that was pretty, in my mind, a no-brainer, and that person decided to do something different without consulting me, and I wasn't happy about it. In this case, I was being very authoritative. Most of the time, I operate more democratically, where I let them make decisions where they are. But in this case, the decision that was made not only wasn't right, but it was going to be a problem. And so you need to have that balance between the two and really supported by those smaller teams that are self-governed. And I don't know about not reporting to leadership, but this idea that they are pretty much self-governed, and you can't be all delegative or you're going to find yourself very, very siloed. So you need to have a combination of these three structures and designs. I really like this next picture that was published by Deloitte. And the idea that when change is predictable, when you have a very stable hierarchy approach, it can support order, it can support clear decision making, and you've got really functional silos where you're working at maximum efficiency, which means you're producing, for less amount of money, you're getting more product. But when we're seeing things like exponential change, it's just not possible for those traditional models to keep up effectively. Because this is how we think our organization works. We've got our leader at the top, we've got our three main divisions or departments, whatever you want to call them, and you see a little bit of collaboration kind of on the edges of those. But notice you don't see the dark blue communicating with that turquoise. They're separated. But in reality, this is how we actually work. We've got all these people, and to be honest, this is the way we should be working. we should get out of our, our lanes, as you might want to say it. My famous quote is being told, just stay in your lane, Linda. Just do this one thing. And I'd be like, well, this one thing doesn't make any sense. Stay in your lane. I don't do that work. Don't work for that company anymore. But this idea that we really work along more informal systems and the way people naturally behave helps really to maximize those opportunities to drive experimentation, innovation, and idea generations, which makes for a happy workplace, which means your people are engaged, which helps you to solve some of that managing change issues. And so we need to enable people to work where they have those and to formalize some of those networks that they're already using. And so when we're looking at that, we need to be as close to our customer as possible. And so we need to look at how we can use informal networks to assess how both your people and your teams are identified and aligned with their customer missions. And so you need to manage both efficiency and flexibility by using both centralized and decentralized teams. Just understanding that your design is not static and that you're going to need to shift teams accordingly as the work or environment shift. And you might always feel like we're always in the middle of a reorg. Well, maybe you don't need a reorg if you're working in an adaptable and flexible design, because people can commonly move from one area to another without needing a complete formal structured reorganization. But we know that in highly regulated industries, you're going to need to have a stable backbone. And so you're going to need to make sure that you've got that efficiency and that you've got that authoritative structure in some aspects of what you're doing. So how can we look at being efficient and adaptable at the same time? Because some people think you cannot do that. So let's just look at a couple of examples of that. You can be very efficient with your shared services. Shared services are designed when you've got goal-specific execution and very operational tasks, which helps you to be very efficient. They're also using dedicated and centralized teams where your work is pretty standardized or transactional. And when you do transition from team to team, there's very well-defined interfaces where you're handing that off to the next team. And you might have a potential for automating some of this. And this is what you see oftentimes when you see shared support functions, things like finance or legal or payroll. You need to have these shared services. This is a good thing. But you can also use what's called pooled resources, where you might design for moderate adaptability and maybe project-specific types of executions. And here is where you might take highly specialized workers that temporarily collaborate with other teams. So here we're putting together kind of an ad hoc team that we're bringing together experts to help manage whatever this new thing is, and that the work itself is more fluid because that demand is more ad hoc. This is where you often see data scientists who are providing insights across the organization. So they're providing data for people as they need it based on specific problems that need to be answered oftentimes, or looking at that predictive analytics, which is what do we see that might be happening with trends. And then we have on the very opposite side of efficiency, which doesn't mean you're not efficient, it just means you're very adaptable, which is those multidisciplinary teams. When you've got mission-specific execution and more entrepreneurial type of tasks. So here is where you might see dedicated and also decentralized teams that are maybe functioning on their own, like we mentioned a minute ago, that are very collaborative, they're multidisciplinary, they might be co-located, where everybody's kind of co-located today anyways, but they're given much more autonomous decision making. And here you might see this when you're looking at cross-functional sales, marketing, and product development team, for example, where you're really trying to deliver value to a mission that's much faster than you might do if you were doing a shared service model. Again, how can you become more adaptable? Well, here, if you're looking at our traditional, the red, green, and blue with your divisions, where here you've got some blue helping out with some of the red, and then on the blue team, you've got some green and blue working together on a project that's very specific, where you've got that cross-functional team. Here you might look at more of a customer mission-based team where you're supported by core functions. So you're taking some of the people from each of those other groups or parts of your organization and putting together those cross-functional teams. And then going again to that completely customer-focused teams where these teams are working very autonomously. And the idea is kind of work back to that concept of mindset, where you're looking at your team-based design, focusing less on who the people work for and more on who are the people that you're working with. And so really you become more adaptable when you make those series of changes that eventually change your culture and DNA of your organization. So here we're gonna focus now on this idea of network density, which means that you've got your group of people that you're working with are multidisciplinary, but we've also got those different groups working together. And this was, putting all these little circles together was a bit tedious, so we would like to see even more lines connecting, but this idea that we are networked and we're not siloed. We're trying to become as unsiloed as we can. And so when we have a very dense network like this, we see that it's much easier to share information such as ideas and values and practices much easier than when you've got a siloed organization. And that the more links you have between the different people and between the teams, the greater likelihood that information can spread. So this really helps you with your communication systems because you're setting those up. You also have access to multiple connections, which you can use to your advantage when you're trying to initiate change. Now you've got people that you can talk to versus if you're just going to the person above you, what I'll call your boss in quotation marks, and that boss says, no, you're stuck. You can go around your boss and get in trouble. Or if you have this kind of a network where you've got people who you're working with versus people that you're working for, it provides you with some opportunities to make some of those changes. It lets you, if you're not able to get one person to be persuaded in what you're trying to do, you can move on to someone else. You're not stuck in your lane. And they use the word change agents here, but just the idea, even in traditional change management, you need change agents and people who can get other people on board. But understanding in today's world, it's about social influence. And it's really effective, of course, when it comes from multiple directions. You might be really, no, this is the way I want to do it, but all of a sudden you've got people trying to convince you to do something differently, and you've got more than one person doing it and expressing it from their point of view, which helps to manage that change and instigate, get that moving. Getting that argument from different sources is really important. And obviously that becomes the tipping off where all of a sudden everybody's kind of on board. And that works for both traditional change management as well as managing change. But this idea that you're going to be able to manage change more effectively and efficiently if we're networked together. So to do that, we need to increase the density in our social networks. So try to connect people where they haven't been connected before. And making sure that we've got reciprocal links versus just coming one direction, where your influence can flow in both directions. Making sure that if you've only got single-stranded links, there's only one way to get somewhere, let's make them more multiplex. Let's get people connected through more than one place. We don't want anybody feeling like they can only go in one direction. And then even just relocating nodes to different work clusters. So when you're on a special team just for a particular project, now you're getting people together for something that you're trying to do new. And as a result of this, a lot of times those middle layers of the hierarchy, so if you're in a very hierarchical system, and if you're part of that middle piece, you might feel a little vulnerable, but this idea that we're all working together for the common good, and we all have our roles and responsibilities, but that we're networked with everyone else. To me, this is a very important aspect of managing risk, in all aspects of managing risk. And so what we also need to do for rewiring the organization for change is looking at where can we add links. So using, leaders and managers being more participatory, trying to be more collaborative and inclusive. We talked about that as well. Having a mentorship program so you can connect people at different parts of the organization and who belong to different hierarchical levels. Where you might do an internal employee transfer or rotation programs. I know this doesn't work everywhere, but it works in a lot of places so that you can put together those cross-functional or cross-divisional task forces to establish those ties. And this last one, I did kind of laugh a little bit because this leadership by walking around is always a big thing, which is a lot harder to do when you're not always in the same building with people. But you can do that walking around in a virtual sense by connecting with people who don't report to you directly. But you need to be in an organization that kind of allows you to that to happen, which means you need to have design physical and virtual social platforms to make it easier for employees to intersect outside of their formal reporting lines. I think, Microsoft Teams and really tries to use that as a basis, and I'm sure there's other tools out there as well. If you do, work at a place, at least some of the time, that you have those open and flexible workspaces, that you've got social media and collaborative online platforms for that you can connect people in all different directions. And even looking at how can we get people or nudge people to get out of their circles. I notice, as being an educator, if you go to if you're taking like an official class, wherever it is, and you're going to a physical location, people pick their spot the first day and they sit there all the time. I used to be a high school teacher, and the first day of class, I would let people sit where they wanted, and they would sit there all year round. It was crazy. I'm like, don't you want to try a different seat? But people get really ingrained in staying in their space. And so figuring out how to get people to get outside of that space is important. So let's do our next poll, which is, to what extent does your organization is your organization structured to effectively manage change? And this is where the answers had to be very short. So the first one is, it uses a customer-focused and multidisciplinary team-based design that pools resources throughout the organization, versus the second one, it uses cross-functional teams for specific projects and sometimes pools resources, or it uses a very authoritative design. I'll give you about 10 more seconds for that. All right, it looks like most of you have voted. So again, I'm really happy to see that more than half of you are at least doing it for specific projects and sometimes pooling. But the other thing that I also think is that number 28% for doing all of those things is amazing. And I think if we asked this question 10 years ago, we might get a very different answer, and we might see a much higher number using that authoritative design exclusively. So it's really interesting to see how things change over time as well, and what companies have been learning. So I wanted to leave you with what does this look like as you're doing this? So how can you build for speed and agility? So you need to have some strategic objectives. So we need to be structured for high performance and managing change. So here are some strategic objectives that an organization might have: that we're going to adopt models that are designed, nurtured, and grown around people and activities. We're going to flatten our structure as much as possible. We're going to design a workplace that is both flexible and efficient. That goes down to everyone's question for the day, is where are we working and when? And then we need to design those networks of cross-functional teams that have clear and accountable roles. A second objective might be to select manageable solutions. So we need to select solutions based on skills and resource availability and the fitness of the solution to manage in a changing environment. And so we really need to make sure that our solutions are able to handle the variability of that changing environment. So actually using that mindset, okay, it works for us now, but will it be able to work for us if we change? We need to increase our adaptive capacity. So in order to do that, you need to be able to monitor and review, see how are we doing? How can we do that through our selection of projects and actions? And how can we do that based on the latest science and based on the anticipation of any projected shift, can't say the word projected, shift in supplier demand, or how your organization's products or services are going to be needed in the future. And we need to be more flexible in our management. So how can we enable the workforce to adapt? We need to have a much more dynamic and flexible management structure. We need to make sure our decision-making teams are diverse and representative of who our customers are, really, and that we provide feedback channels to ensure that we have active engagement with management. And we need to increase our capacity for transformation. When we're seeing work of constant change, it means you're going to have to transform. We need to be looking at our small scale failures and our near failure events so that we can analyze those for learning opportunities, that we can then go back and revise our management strategies. We expect, back to that mindset, that operational best practice is going to change when we have more new data and evidence, and that we need to anticipate that events are going to occur that's going to saturate our adaptive capacity, which means we're going to have to look at how do we realign and coordinate across multiple interdependent networks or units in a network. So when we see transformation and we see, okay, we're pretty much at our limit for what we can do under this current structure, we're going to need to look at how can we modify that to make sure we can stay adaptive and flexible. Some of the capabilities of organizations that are more, I'll just use the word agile here, is that you're aware of circumstances that are likely to influence change and you demonstrate the ability to anticipate and manage change, that you're able to adapt yourselves when needed and without significant impact to delivery of your products or services. Here is where, business continuity people can sell their expertise, is that we've put systems in place to make sure that we can continue operations under all conditions, which means we're able to adapt and move ahead because we've thought this out ahead of time, and we're looking and forecasting what might happen. If we're looking at scenario planning, for example, that for all sorts of things. But we also understand the causes of change resistance, and we understand who those people are. And so we're trying to make sure that we get those people engaged and that we've got a strong change narrative to help them understand why it's important. We, as an organization, we understand how the structure and design of the organization impacts its agility. Our structure and design allows our people to collaborate and communicate. Here's really important. You can find this out in a survey. You can find this out by talking to people. Are you able to collaborate and communicate effectively, both horizontally and vertically throughout the organization? At what point have you been designed to have shorter chains of command or lines of authority, which allows for more delegation and empowerment and operating in as flat a structure as possible? And you've got this bias to action where you're valuing speed, not risk management over perfection. So we understand, especially in highly regulated environments, that you need to be looking at how you're managing the risk side of this, but you also need to make decisions quickly. And so as a result of this, your structure and design allows those responsible for responding to and managing an incident, for example, to switch from one design to another. And you often see this when you're in the middle of a crisis or an incident, that people are now working in a different way than they were before. So at minimum, we should see that your organization structure and design allows for those people managing risk to work in a more agile and flexible manner. So to close up, you need to have people who are adaptable. Or like I said at the beginning, your organization's made up of people. And so like a lot of organizations, Indeed and all of those, LinkedIn has put together kind of what they say they look for, or they're helping companies look for, as well as soft skills. And they said that 69% of hiring managers say the most important soft skill they screen for is adaptability. And so they're looking for people who with a positive can-do attitude and a willingness to grasp or take advantage of opportunities. They're people that are able to work positively. You see that word positive in both places in an ever-changing, fast-paced environment. We're after ambitious people who can respond with pace and energy, to every issue they face. Again, that seems like very a positive person because you're trying to do that with energy. That you're open to learning new systems and procedures, that you demonstrate a dynamic approach, that you're looking for people who have the right attitude towards change, who respond positively to change, and that they, as well as challenges and opportunities that that change brings. And these quotes are all taken from job advertisements. They don't use the word adaptable and flexible, but they're looking for candidates who have these qualities. And they want candidates who can thrive in a culture of change and continuous improvement and who can be flexible in the way they work and think. So how do you identify those? Well, you want people who are receptive, particularly to change. We want people who are creative, who are actively seeking out new ways of doing things and have confidence in that. We want people who are able to modify your behavior, who are able to adjust. You're able to adjust your style of working or method of approach to meet either the needs of a situation or an emergency. And you're also looking for flexibility in intellectual or cognitive ways, keeping an open mind. I just never forget my dad. He just, oh my gosh, if you wanted to have a stereotype for someone who didn't want to change anything, and he would say, no, just as long as I don't have to change anything I do, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, Dad, everything's changing. And it was just, he would listen, but he'd be like, no, I think I'm good where I'm at. And so if you need to be able to integrate new information and draw conclusions from it, so that you can really switch from the detail to the big picture as part of that cognitive flexibility. So here's some 5 questions that you could ask if you're wanting to screen for adaptability. First one is, tell me about a time when you were asked to do something you'd never done before. How did you react? What did you learn? And what you're listening for is excitement about tackling new challenges and a willingness to leave their comfort zone, knowing that they'll learn something valuable from the experience. The second question is, describe a situation in which you embraced a new system, process, technology, or idea at work that was a major departure from the old way of doing things. And here what you're listening for is that eagerness to explore new ways of working and improved based on what they've learned. And if they discover a better way, that they've been able to embrace that change. Third question is, recall the time when you were assigned a task outside of your job description. How did you handle the situation? What was the outcome? And here you're looking for an understanding that their job might evolve, that they're willing to try something new, and they're willing to take the necessary steps to ensure that they were successful. The fourth question is, tell me about the biggest change you've had to deal with, and how did you adapt to that change? So here they're using the word adapt right in it. And really what you're looking for is acceptance that change is inevitable, that they focused on how they could adapt successfully, and how to evaluate a new situation and find the support that they needed. And the fifth question is, tell me about a time when you had to adjust to a colleague's working style. Here's always a fun one. You have to adjust in order to complete a project or achieve your outcomes instead of the other person adjusting. So here is, you're looking for that willingness to be flexible when it's required, and the ability to reflect on what they've learned from the experience, whether it's good or bad. So our last poll is, to what extent does your organization have strategic objectives that are focused on building a more adaptable and flexible organization? And the first question is, it includes strategic objectives and intentionally seeks people who demonstrate the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The second one is that the strategic objectives are inferred but not specifically documented. And the third one is that they don't see any evidence of this mindset or objectives. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds. Okay. Well, I am happy to see that only 3% of you said they don't see any evidence of this. And I'm just saying, how do you manage to work there? But I am also encouraged that this is the first time that the first one really got the most results from. And so I think, again, I do think that this is something that we're seeing a change of, that if we asked this question 5 or 10 years ago, you might get a very different answer. If your organization did not change during the pandemic, they're probably not around. And so all of us have seen some examples of that. Um, and that the people are trying to improve the way that they're doing that. So I wanted to finish up with all of the cartoons that I found that we didn't use. So what if we don't change at all and something just magical happens? I liked this cartoon, but I wasn't very happy. And I know you can see the profits and sales are both going down here. You've got 5 men in the room, 1 woman, and it's the woman who's saying something stupid. So sorry, that's just me as a woman leader, not necessarily like the context of that, but I did like the, what if something magical just happens? And this is, again, I'm naming you Vice President of Revolution, Action, and Edgy Thinking on one condition, that you promise not to change anything. And then here they're hiding. The announcement of the changes really went well. And sometimes change can get a little bit messy as everybody just leaves. And finally, I think how we all feel. Who wants change? We all want change. And the question becomes, who wants to change? And the answer is really none of us. It is a difficult piece. So let me check my questions. So one of the questions was, do we need to use a Myers-Briggs personality test or something similar to hire more adaptive people? And that's the most common answer that I've seen is yes. Myers-Briggs does a really nice job with this. There are other assessments out there, but they really have the best one, and it's a longitudinal, work that's been going on for many, many years. So that is probably my best suggestion. But again, I'm not in the psychological testing space. So getting to your talent management people to find out what they're asking. I do know that more and more you see people saying they've got the right skills, but they're not the right person for this team or for this job. And you're seeing a lot more of that. I was also talking to a friend of mine who changed jobs after being at the same company for 30 years. And she goes, I had to go through 3 days of testing. They didn't even want to know what I knew. It was all about who I was, who I am. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. Any other questions before I move on? Otherwise, feel free to include them in the survey that comes after. As usual, we'll share with you the references that we used for some of this work, and remind you that we do have our Leadership in Resilience series of certifications and courses that you could that are really intended for people trying to increase resilience and for managing risk throughout the organization. That if you've missed any of our past webinar series, again, you can find those on our website or on our YouTube channel. And next month, at the end of the month, we're going to be talking about workforce resilience. And feel free to contact us to learn more. We'd love to hear from you. We love your ideas. They really do help us to provide a way to focus on what it is that you're looking for. So thank you very much for your time today, and keep enjoying the rest of the week. Bye, everyone.